Hello, friends. Are you watching this alone or with someone? Tell me in the comments.
I remember the exact moment I realized pain could make time stretch, like it was mocking me. I was hunched over on the kitchen floor, not from some dramatic accident, just tying my damn shoe. One wrong twist, one sudden bolt of heat down my spine, and boom, flat on the floor like a rag doll. Every breath tighter than the last. I stayed there for hours, my phone lying 6 feet away like it was a mile. That's when it all started. Not the injury. Hell, that was just anatomy doing what it does. No, I'm talking about the unraveling. The slow, bitter realization that some people you love don't see you bleeding until it inconveniences them. I was 38, single, working remote contracts for design agencies, juggling bills like a circus clown, health insurance being one of the pins I'd long since dropped. So when the ER handed me that printed slip, 38,000 and some change, not including follow-ups or the MRI, I laughed. Honest to God, I laughed right in the nurse's face. She didn't even blink, just handed me a packet titled Payment Options, like it was a coupon booklet. I waited 3 days before calling my parents, not because I thought they'd say no, but because I still, stupidly, believed we were the kind of family where the words, "I need help," meant something. I spent a full hour rehearsing the call, less begging, more dignified asking. I told myself they'd at least offer a loan or co-sign a plan. They weren't rich, but they were comfortable. My dad retired from state work with a pension. My mom still ran her little boutique shop in Nashville. They had 2 cars, no debt, and that perfectly landscaped lawn they never shut up about. When my mom picked up, she sounded chipper, upbeat, like she was walking through Target or something. I explained everything, my back, the scan, the hospital, the number. And when I paused, letting the silence ask the question for me, she gave this little sigh, not exasperated, just final. "Oh, honey," she said, "I wish we could help, but we've really got nothing to spare right now." I remember blinking, then laughing again, like maybe she was joking, but she wasn't. I asked if maybe they could just front something, a small part, maybe 5 or 10,000, just to get the collection dogs off my heels. She hesitated, then said it again, slower, firmer. "We just can't, sweetie. Things are tight." She offered prayers, said she believed in my strength, then told me to stay positive like this was some motivational video. I hung up without saying goodbye. Here's the thing. If she'd sounded broken up about it, like it hurt her to say no, maybe I could have swallowed it. But her tone was casual, like I'd asked her to loan me a pair of earrings, and she was just being practical. I sold my car the next week, an old Subaru I'd poured love and money into, and scraped together enough for a partial payment plan. I canceled all non-essential expenses, started making jewelry at night to sell online. My life shrank down to a single focus, getting out of this hole alone. And then came the punch. Scrolling through Instagram one night, because apparently I hate myself, I saw my brother David's post. Big-ass smile, reflective Ray-Bans, standing on the dock of a lake with a beer in one hand and a golden retriever at his feet. The caption read, "Best birthday gift ever. Thank you, Mom and Dad. Y'all are unbelievable." I clicked the location tag. It wasn't some Airbnb, it was a newly purchased property. The public records listed David as the owner, but the transaction, $92,000 down, came straight from my parents' trust account. I stared at that screen like it owed me a different story. I tried to convince myself there was some other explanation. Maybe it was an old picture. Maybe the caption was misleading. But deep down, I knew. They had money. They had more than enough. Just not for me. You ever been gut punched so hard you feel it in your teeth? That's what betrayal like that does. It's not just the lie, it's the rewriting of history. I started asking myself things I didn't want to ask. Had they always favored David? Was I just too blind, or maybe too proud, to see it? And worse, had they always seen me as the strong one because it gave them an excuse not to show up? He's 4 years younger, always the golden boy. Got bailed out when he crashed his first car. Moved back home at 27 rent-free. They framed it as support, said he was finding himself. I never moved back, never asked for help. Maybe that was my crime. I didn't sleep that night, not out of anger. Anger's easy. It was grief, pure, ugly grief, the kind that makes you question every Christmas, every birthday call, every smile in an old family photo. What if all of it meant less to them than it did to me? Let me ask you something. If you were staring down a $40,000 bill, your spine literally broken, and your parents said they had nothing left, then handed your younger brother a Lakehouse for his birthday, what would you do? Would you cry? Would you call them back and beg for answers? Or would you do what I did? Would you go quiet, make a plan, and wait for your moment? Because I did. And believe me, it's coming. In the days that followed David's post, I felt like I was walking through a fog so thick it stuck to my skin, and no matter how many times I tried to shake it off, it lingered, dense and cloying and clinging to everything I thought I understood about the people who raised me. I couldn't stop staring at that image, his toothy grin framed by the golden hour sun, standing so proud in front of a sprawling wooden deck that overlooked a quiet, glassy lake. It wasn't just the house or the dog, or even the stupid caption that burned me from the inside. It was the knowledge that this wasn't a one-time moment of generosity or spontaneity. This was something planned, deliberate, expensive, and worst of all, done behind my back, while I was literally lying flat in bed, struggling to breathe through the pain and calculating which utility I could skip that month without ending up in total darkness. For a while, I told myself there had to be some other explanation, because the alternative, believing that my own parents had intentionally chosen to reward my brother while I was in crisis, was so absurdly cruel it almost didn't compute. I even convinced myself that maybe the house was a timeshare, or maybe David had bought it himself and my parents just helped with paperwork. Or hell, maybe the whole thing was a flex, a lie for the internet, a performance for likes. But then I remembered that I didn't grow up in a family of liars. At least, I didn't think I did. That's the part that gnawed at me the most. Realizing that maybe I never knew them at all, or maybe I only knew the version of them that needed me to believe a certain story about how we all loved each other equally. I don't know what finally pushed me to dig deeper. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was a need for certainty. Or maybe, deep down, I still hoped I'd find something that made this all make sense. But late one night, I opened my laptop and went down the rabbit hole. Real estate records aren't hard to find if you know where to look, and within 10 minutes, I had the deed in front of me. The Lakehouse was real. It had been purchased just 3 weeks prior, in full, with the down payment coming from a trust fund under my parents' names. David was listed as the sole owner. The final price was $230,000. And not only had they paid the down payment, but they had also covered the first year of taxes and gifted him the furnishings. I stared at those numbers like they were a foreign language. I kept refreshing the page, like maybe the information would change, like maybe I had typed something wrong, but it didn't change. It only became clearer and uglier with every line I read. They didn't just help him. They set him up. They gave him a sanctuary while I was rationing painkillers and drinking instant coffee from the same chipped mug every morning because it hurt too much to reach the top shelf. The next morning, after sleeping maybe 2 hours total, I called my mother. I didn't plan the conversation. I didn't write out what I wanted to say. I just called, hands shaking, stomach sour, voice dry like dust. When she picked up, she sounded surprised, pleasantly even, like she had no idea I might be calling with something other than cheerful small talk. I asked her about the house. I didn't yell, didn't accuse, didn't cry. I asked her directly, point blank. "Did you buy David a Lakehouse?" There was silence on the line for maybe 3 seconds, which in mother-daughter time feels like a damn eternity. And then she said, "Oh, is that what this is about?" I could feel the blood drain from my face. She sounded annoyed, like I had brought up a canceled dinner reservation or a parking ticket, not like I had uncovered a massive betrayal. I asked her again, and this time her tone shifted slightly, less dismissive, more defensive. "It was an opportunity, Lisa. Your father and I found a place that made sense, And David's always talked about needing somewhere peaceful, somewhere away from the chaos. You know how sensitive he is. And frankly, honey, we didn't think you'd be interested in that kind of thing. I swear, for a moment I thought I had hallucinated the sentence. Interested? I told her I didn't need a lake house. I needed help with a medical bill. I needed to not drown. I told her it wasn't about property. It was about being left behind, about being lied to, about being treated like I was some extra character in my own damn family. She went quiet again, then tried to explain that David had been struggling with anxiety, that he was under so much pressure, and that they thought giving him a place to breathe would help him reset. As if I was just fine. As if my pain didn't count because I didn't scream about it the same way. That conversation ended with me saying, I hope the lake is peaceful enough to make up for what you did. I hung up and didn't pick up again. Not for days. Not when my dad called twice. Not when David texted me with some smug, half-assed line about how it wasn't a competition. His exact words, Mom said you'd twist this into drama. She said you were always good at being the victim. I didn't respond. I just took a screenshot, saved it to a folder called Reality, and blocked him. And that's when it started. The silence. The kind of silence that fills a house and makes every creak of the floorboards feel like a scream. I was alone, truly alone, for the first time in my life. Not because I had no one, but because the people I had believed would always be there had made it crystal clear. I was only part of the family when it was convenient for them. So I did what I do best. I documented everything. I started collecting proof, not because I had a plan just yet, but because some small voice inside me whispered, You'll want this later. I wrote down dates, saved texts, printed records. I cleaned my apartment like it was a battlefield, and I needed a clear view of the enemy. I started eating better. I forced myself to walk more, stretch more, meditate even when I hated it. Because if I couldn't make them pay with dollars, I'd make them pay with distance, with clarity, with absence. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I wasn't ready to serve it yet, but I was learning to enjoy the chill. The letter came on a Wednesday, folded neatly in a pale blue envelope that smelled faintly of her perfume, lavender, and some overpriced soap store she always dragged me to in the mall when I was a kid. I found it in the mailbox, wedged between a property tax notice and a coupon booklet for fast food I'd never order, and for a full 2 hours I left it on the kitchen counter unopened, its presence gnawing at me like a splinter under skin. I already knew who it was from. My mother's handwriting hadn't changed since middle school, that loopy, careful cursive she used for birthday cards and passive-aggressive notes she'd leave on the fridge when she was annoyed. Please rinse your dishes, I am not your maid, she'd once written in perfect script when I was 15. The irony, of course, being that she never wrote those notes to David. He could leave a trail of cereal boxes and she'd laugh like he was some mischievous artist creating chaos on purpose. When I finally opened it, I didn't sit down. I stood there by the sink, the afternoon sun catching the creases of the paper, casting tiny shadows across her words. The letter was exactly what I expected. An expertly crafted blend of self-pity, denial, and carefully selected memories meant to soften the edges of what they'd done. She didn't apologize, not really. She used phrases like, I'm sorry you feel that way, and it wasn't our intention to hurt you, as if pain was some kind of optional reaction, a personal quirk I was choosing to indulge in. She wrote about how families go through rough patches, about how she missed hearing my voice, about how David never meant to cause a rift, and that he'd been under so much pressure lately. She asked if we could start fresh, like this was a misunderstanding, like they hadn't watched me drown and tossed a life raft at someone already sitting on the shore. The letter closed with a reminder that Thanksgiving was just a few months away, and that it would mean a lot to her if I came home. Home. That word stuck in my throat like a jagged stone. What did home even mean anymore? Was it the house I hadn't been invited to in 2 years? The same one where David now hosted barbecues on weekends, according to his Facebook, with friends I didn't know and a girlfriend whose name I hadn't bothered to learn? I didn't write back. I didn't text or call. I didn't even rant about it to friends. I just folded the letter, tucked it into a drawer next to the rest of the evidence, and went about my week like it was a chore list. Each task mechanical, detached, necessary. The pain in my back had dulled to something manageable by then. Not gone, just quieter, like a radio playing static in another room. I had finally scheduled the surgery. Thanks to a state assistance program I qualified for, after a mountain of paperwork and a few well-placed phone calls from an old friend who worked in healthcare advocacy. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than lying in bed praying my spine didn't collapse every time I sneezed. I didn't tell them about the surgery, not a word. No updates, no pictures, no dramatic posts. I disappeared from their world, and for the first time in my adult life, it felt like I could breathe without waiting for someone to tell me I was overreacting. I spent my recovery time quietly building something I hadn't allowed myself to believe I could have again. Independence not just from circumstance, but from the emotional leash they had always managed to keep looped around my neck. I picked up old skills, turned my jewelry making into a side hustle that began to bring in real money, slowly pulled myself out of financial ruin with the kind of quiet, stubborn determination my mother used to call too intense. Funny how that trait never bothered her when it helped her move house or handle David's messes, but the second I turned it inward, it became a flaw. The silence lasted 6 months. 6 full months of no calls, no texts, no guilt traps disguised as small talk. For a while, I almost believed they'd accepted it, that maybe we were all better off this way. Me carving a life with new habits and boundaries, and them pretending I was just busy or stubborn or going through something I'd eventually snap out of. And then, right around the first week of October, I got the invitation. A thick, glossy envelope with David and his fiancé's names embossed in gold, announcing their upcoming wedding at a vineyard 3 hours outside Charlotte. The card was excessive. Faux lace design, a photo insert of them kissing under a tree, and RSVP options that included a choice of entree and whether you'd be bringing a +1. But the part that hit hardest was the handwritten note in the bottom margin. Hope to see you there, sweetheart. Love, Mom. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just a return to the script, as if the last 6 months and the years before them hadn't happened at all. I stared at that card for a long time, letting its weight sit in my palm like a dare. I wanted to rip it, to burn it, to send it back with something vicious written in lipstick across the RSVP card. But instead, I just set it on the table and walked away. 2 days later, my aunt called. She had heard from my mother, who apparently just couldn't understand why Lisa was being so cold. And that's when she said something that stopped me in my tracks. Did you hear they're selling the Lakehouse? I froze. I asked her to repeat it. She said David and the fiancé were talking about moving into the city, that maintaining a second property was too much stress, that the taxes were getting ridiculous, and it was all just more than they needed. So that was it. The perfect gift, the grand gesture, the thing that made me disposable. Now just another liability being quietly offloaded. I sat down in the kitchen and laughed, a deep, bitter laugh that echoed through the house like a door slamming shut. They were already moving on, already erasing the evidence, but I wasn't done, not yet. Because if they thought silence meant surrender, if they thought distance meant defeat, they hadn't been paying attention at all. They forgot who I was, but I hadn't. It had been nearly 9 months since that last phone call, the one where my mother had said, with the kind of careful detachment usually reserved for strangers in a waiting room, that she wished she could do something, but there was simply nothing left to give, as if I was asking for a piece of her soul instead of just enough to stay afloat, just enough to feel like her daughter again instead of some cautionary tale they discussed behind closed doors. I had stopped marking the days after that. Time folded in on itself, and though I never truly stopped thinking about them, never stopped wondering if they lay awake the way I did, staring at the ceiling and trying to pretend they hadn't chosen him, I did stop expecting anything. And in that stillness, in the quiet routine of my life rebuilt, I had begun to feel something dangerously close to peace. But peace, as I've learned, is always temporary when it comes from people who think of love as a transaction, a ledger of favors and loyalty that only matters when it benefits them. The first warning came not as a storm, but as a knock, a soft, uncertain knock on my door one gray Saturday morning, followed by silence that felt heavier than the door between us. I opened it not out of curiosity, but instinct, half expecting a neighbor or a package drop-off, maybe even one of those clipboard charity kids who always ask if you have a moment to talk about the environment. But what stood there wasn't any of those things. It was my mother, and the look on her face, some strange cocktail of relief, guilt, and desperate calculation, told me everything before she even opened her mouth. She looked smaller somehow, like someone who had recently lost something she didn't expect to lose and hadn't quite figured out how to say it out loud. Her makeup was minimal, her hair pulled back in that lazy half bun she used to wear on weekends when we cleaned the house together and pretended we were in a sitcom. But there was no pretending now. I was in the area, she said, and the lie hung there between us like a bad smell. No one is ever just in the area of a house they haven't visited in years, a house they've never made the effort to find until suddenly, mysteriously, now. I didn't say anything. I didn't invite her in. I didn't smile or offer her coffee or even ask why she was there. I just stood in the doorway, arms crossed, waiting for the punchline. She started talking, and the words spilled out in waves, not quite an apology, but something adjacent, something rehearsed. She said they missed me, that David was worried about me, that the wedding had been beautiful, but not the same without you. As if I'd simply skipped out on a family picnic instead of deliberately choosing to sever the last fraying cord between us. She told me they had made mistakes, that things got out of hand, that they never intended for me to feel cast aside. But it wasn't until she said the words, "We could really use your help," that I understood the timing, because that's what this was. Not a reunion, not a reckoning, a pitch. I didn't respond. I just stared at her, long enough that she started shifting uncomfortably on the porch, fingers twisting the edge of her cardigan. And then I said something I hadn't planned, something that came out of me like a reflex. "You sold the Lakehouse." She blinked once, twice, like she was debating whether to lie or deny or both. Finally, she nodded. "Things changed," she said, and there was a tremble in her voice now, real and raw and possibly the first honest thing she'd said since she arrived. "David's business collapsed. The wedding cost more than we planned. Your father's retiring early, health stuff, nothing major, but we're stretched thin." It was almost impressive how quickly they'd gone from benefactors to beggars, how fast the story changed when the script no longer served them. And what cut deeper than anything else was the implication that I, the one they left behind, was now the person they expected to save them. As if being the daughter meant being the safety net, the emergency plan they could dust off when the golden boy dropped the ball. A few days later, an email arrived from my father, long, formal, full of nostalgia and carefully worded regret. The kind of thing he used to write to supervisors when he needed to dodge blame but look cooperative. He spoke of legacy, of family bonds, of the fragility of time. He said he wanted to reconnect, to leave things in a better place, and that he hoped I'd come to the house one evening soon for dinner. There was no mention of the Lakehouse, of the money, or of the fact that I'd spent the better part of a year clawing my way back from a hole they watched me fall into. I forwarded the email to myself, saved it in the same folder where I'd been keeping everything else, the deed, the screenshots, the messages. The archive was growing, and with each edition, the picture became clearer, not just of what they'd done, but of what they continued to believe about me, that I'd always bend, that I'd always come home, that I'd never let them feel the weight of their choices because somewhere inside, I still needed them. But they were wrong, and I was no longer interested in being the daughter they remembered. Not when the woman I'd become was finally learning the power of saying nothing, of holding the silence, of letting their desperation echo in a room I no longer had to occupy. I wasn't going to scream or argue or beg. I wasn't going to write another letter or compose the perfect text or stage some emotional confrontation over dinner. I was going to wait, watch, and when the time came, I'd answer them in a language they finally understood. Not with forgiveness, but with something much colder. There's a peculiar kind of satisfaction that comes not from vengeance in the classic fire and brimstone sense, but from the slow, calculated revelation of one's own value. When the people who discarded you begin to realize you were never a disposable part of their lives, but the thread that quietly held their version of family together without making a show of it. And when that thread is pulled loose, they find themselves scrambling, confused, like children left alone in a room they thought they understood, suddenly unsure of where the walls end. I had no interest in shouting. I didn't need anyone to cry or beg or throw themselves at my feet. What I wanted, what I truly craved, was for them to sit with the same weight I had carried for over a year. That crushing, breath-stealing awareness that the people you needed most in your darkest hour had calculated your worth and deemed you unworthy. I planned everything over the course of 2 weeks, each detail mapped with the kind of precision they'd always praised me for when it suited their needs, back when I was the responsible one, the planner, the rock. I rented a Lakehouse, not the one they had gifted David, of course. That dream had long been foreclosed, but one not too far from where theirs had once stood, in a quiet corner of North Carolina that was still warm enough in late autumn to feel soft around the edges. I used my own money, earned from months of hustling, selling my art, budgeting like a monk, clawing back every ounce of dignity they had tried to strip from me. I made it beautiful, fresh flowers, curated playlists, home-cooked meals that smelled like childhood on purpose. It was bait, and I laid it perfectly. I called it a family reset, borrowing the same nauseating language they had used in their letters and emails. I told them I was ready to talk, to move forward, to forgive. My mother cried over the phone. My father sounded stunned, almost reverent, like I had performed a miracle by simply agreeing to be in the same room again. David texted a thumbs up and a looking forward to it, like we were casual acquaintances meeting for brunch, not estranged siblings orbiting an emotional landmine. They were eager, hopeful, hungry for resolution they believed they could control, as though reconciliation were something they could simply show up to and collect like an inheritance. They arrived on a Friday afternoon, each of them dressed in their best, trying clothes. Mom in a cardigan she'd once worn to church, Dad in his khakis and a button-down that still carried the scent of his cologne, David in some ridiculous new boots that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. I greeted them with warmth that was rehearsed but convincing, a smile just wide enough to suggest goodwill without giving away the underlying structure of my intentions. I poured wine. I asked about their drive. I complimented my mother's earrings. For a few hours, we played the game. That evening, after dinner and more wine and a strained attempt at a board game we hadn't touched in years, I suggested we take a walk by the water. The lake was calm, almost unnervingly so, reflecting the moonlight in thin, shimmering lines that looked too perfect to be real. We stood at the dock in silence, the four of us, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to imagine the scene playing out differently, a version of our lives where honesty had been the default and love wasn't rationed like oxygen. But that version didn't exist. It never had. I handed my father a letter I had written weeks before. It contained no threats, no accusations, no poetic recounting of past wounds, just facts. A detailed timeline of what I had endured after the injury, with documentation to match, bank statements, medical bills, email threads with billing departments, and at the end, a simple paragraph outlining the moment I discovered the Lakehouse, the date it was purchased, the exact amount of the down payment, and the evidence tying it directly to them. I watched his face as he read it, as the slow realization crawled across his expression like a storm front approaching. My mother leaned over his shoulder, her hand slowly coming to her mouth. The horror not theatrical but quiet and real. David stood a few feet back, unreadable, arms crossed like a man trying not to shiver. I wanted you to see, I said calmly, my voice steady, not cold, but hollowed out by time. Not because I think you'll say the right thing, but because I needed to be sure you could no longer pretend you didn't know. We walked back to the house in silence. That night, while they slept, Mom in the master bedroom, Dad on the pullout, David on the couch, I packed my things. Not all of them, just enough. I left behind the meals, the fresh flowers, the playlists still queued up. I took only what I needed, locked the front door behind me, and scheduled a timed text message to be delivered at sunrise. It went out to all three of them simultaneously. A simple message that read, "Now you know what it feels like to be left with no explanation, no warning, and no guarantee anyone is coming back. Sit with that." I turned off my phone after that, got in the car, drove east until the lake was a memory, and the road stretched ahead like a clean sheet of paper waiting to be filled. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't still hurt. Some bruises don't fade with time, they just change color. But because for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I had nothing left to prove. They would wake up to silence. They would sit in that rented house, surrounded by the remnants of what they thought was a reunion, and realize it had been a reckoning. Do I regret it? That's the question I keep asking myself in the quiet moments when the high fades, and I'm left with nothing but my own thoughts. Maybe a little, maybe not at all. Because revenge, as it turns out, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it smells like your mother's perfume on a letter that said, "Too little, too late." Sometimes it sits beside you on the dock, watching the reflection of a full moon on the lake your brother didn't get to keep. And sometimes, just sometimes, it looks like walking away. Not because you're weak, but because you're finally strong enough not to stay.